as a physician to interrupt the day. It's now 3 o'clock in Eastern Standard Time in Miami, but I closed the door, turned off the phone, and said I have to do something. So we're going to be uninterrupted. Whenever I'm being asked to talk about my story, I recoil a little bit because my intent was and is not to tell a story or tell somebody something that it sounds nice. The goal is to explain how a person, i.e. yours truly, can change his or her own life based on the facts and the situation around him or her. And I felt compelled to talk about it because my son Tal, he's now 31, he was 15 at the time, asked me at that age, 15, a simple question. He asked me in Hebrew, Abba mir Saba sheli, father who is my grandfather. And that just revealed to me that I never told him anything about it, and he has a desire to hear about it. But how to say that? And to explain, because my son was and is and will be a Jewish boy going to Jewish school, elementary school, to kindergarten, to high school, all Jewish. That's the reason why I can never stop working, because I have 3 children that sent through the system. But anyway, how can I tell a nice Jewish boy that on the one hand, his father, yours truly, is a Jew, an Israeli, and served as a physician in a combat unit in the Israeli army. On the other hand, my father, his grandfather, was a highly decorated World War II German tank commander and convinced National Socialist. How these two worlds can be reconciled, it can't be. So I told him the truth, what happened to me, and approximately the same story with some variation, from new information that I gathered, is the story that I'm going to tell you. I was born May the 9th, 1958 in Bamberg, Germany, a day and 15 years after a day and 12 years after the end of the Second World War. And I grew up in this gorgeous city in Germany called Bamberg. I'm not work for the tourism industry, but it's a 1,000-year-old city, untouched by any wars, a living, breathing museum. Once it was the residence of the Pope outside Rome. The only Pope outside Rome was buried there. We as children knew about the history of the town from the beginning to the end because we were surrounded by history. But one thing I noticed as a little munchkin, not necessarily that I knew, but I noticed that there's something not being talked about. I had no idea what, but something is not, let me use the term, kosher. And that's the fact that we didn't talk about a time period between 1933 to 1945. That was taboo. And I knew as a child, 6, 7, 8 years old, that something happened. I knew a war happened and that the war reshaped our country. I knew that there were 15,000 American soldiers and family members living in the town, including a complete garrison and infantry unit outside Bamberg. And Bamberg in a city of 75,000, that was, of course, unusual. And I knew that when foreign soldiers are in town, that means we didn't win that war. So that is the only thing I knew about that war. And when I asked my parents, my father and my mother about my grandparents, I was told they're gone because of the war. So a war shaped the history of this country. The war shaped my life, but nobody wanted to talk about it. Slowly but surely, though, my parents started to talk about that war and what happened to them, because I nudged them. I wanted to know my past. And I heard 2 different stories. From my father's side, the story of glory, and from my mother's side, the story of horror. And my father, with whom I had a very close relationship with, he was an outdoor person, a hunter. He went fishing with me, how to handle a rifle, taught me to shoot. And on long walks that we had on Sunday afternoons, he told me over and over and over again the same story. Once he started talking, he didn't stop, about him serving as the youngest tank commander in the German army under the command of the German general called Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And as his assistant, this elite unit battled on every front. They were first to roll in Poland, September 1939, France and Benelux, in Holland and Belgium in 1940. And then, of course, the fatal attack on the former Soviet Union in 1941. and the attack, Operation Barbarossa in July 1941. My father's tanks were the first rolling in. He was actually pushing towards Moscow and almost reached it with his unit by conquering a strategically located town on the way towards Moscow called Orel. And for that accomplishment, this surprise, unbelievable accomplishment, he was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he still adoringly referred to as his Führer Adolf Hitler. Now, I had no idea what Adolf Hitler was and what he did. I'd never heard his name, but my father was the knight in shining armor. And that message that my father was a hero was reinforced by his old war buddies who came to visit our house at least once a year to celebrate the good old times. They meant the war. And they were impressive people. And I was sitting with them, and there were former generals and officers, and they all referred to my father as Arturo, our hero. And you, Bernd, need to be proud of your father. I was proud of my father. I had no reference value, and I was mighty proud about him. On the other hand, my mother told me a completely different story, though, about suffering, horror. She was born as an ethnic German in Sudetenland. These were the former German territories along the western border of Czechoslovakia. About almost 1.5 million Germans lived there, ethnic Germans. And as a result of the war, they were all evicted. Many were killed, and my mother escaped with her parents on a push towards the west, because in the east, the Russians pushed forward towards Czechoslovakia. And everything lost. The business of my grandfather was a wealthy merchant. The villa in the outskirts of Karlsbad, everything gone. And so I heard these two stories, horror and glory. But there was something else that my parents didn't talk about. It was not the whole story. And that happened to be a new aspect of the story for me, because we lived in this two-story massive building in downtown Bamberg, 19th century style, patrician style building. And the entire second floor of the building was occupied by the landlady. And we lived downstairs in an apartment together with another family. And in the hallway, right next to the wooden stairway leading upstairs to the landlady's apartment, I was not supposed to talk to her. She was a noble woman, my mother said. I should not respond, just be polite. And there was a big portrait hanging right next to the wooden stairway, depicting an officer in uniform, a painting, with a knight's cross around his neck. And when I asked my father who this man was or what this picture meant, my father referred to him as der Verräter, the traitor. It was a picture of Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who was leading the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on the 20th of July, 1944, which failed, unfortunately. And his widow, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs. From her, we rented our apartment. And Nina von Stauffenberg was a unique woman, but for me first, the negative reaction that my father had towards this picture, this man, even though both had the same uniform, perplexed me. Why can one person be good, my father, and the other person who looked like him be bad? Simple question of a child. And the landlady, Nina von Stauffenberg, his widow, lived upstairs. And whenever her grandchildren came to visit, I sneaked upstairs to play with them. And that was mostly in the weekends. My parents were sleeping in the afternoon on Sunday. So I played with them. And in the apartment, I remember there were wall-to-wall built pictures, photographs, paintings of herself and her husband, a wonderful, caring, nurturing man. He couldn't have been bad. That was my first reaction. And in school, I was about 12, 14 years old. We started to talk about that war, but in a sanitized version. Approximately the following version we heard. The Nazis rose to power in January 1933 as democratically elected party, and Hitler was appointed by the democratically elected president Hindenburg and his chancellor von Papen. And on the 30th of January 1933, and Hitler rose to power and abolished all the forms of democracy. The fragile Weimar Republic was smashed, established a brutal dictatorship, and those who didn't want to listen and those who were considered to be enemies of the state were thrown in a concentration camp. And the Nazis started the Second World War in 1939. 50, 60 million people died, perished. Among them, 6 million Jews as collateral damage of war. No Holocaust, no nothing. And on the 8th of May, the Nazis surrendered. Hitler committed suicide before. And as a result, like the Huns invaded Germany, they escaped. So everything is hunky-dory, we're going back to square one. Now, of course, that was concentrated horse manure. We used the sanitized version. This was not the real story. And the real story revealed itself in summer 1972, the Olympics in Germany, in Munich. And for us, in that 14 years old, in my case, this was a huge event. We were taught that this is a way that Germany, West Germany at least, presents itself to the world as a democracy, in a democracy embedded in the military and economic alliance with the West, and actually led at that time by a chancellor, prime minister, his name was Willy Brandt, who himself was a victim of the Nazis, not like his predecessors, who were actually member of the Nazi party. He was different. As a victim of the Nazis, he had to escape Germany, as he was a socialist, and returned to Germany in 1949 to reclaim his citizenship and to reclaim the leadership of the now called Social Democratic Party. He won in a landslide the elections in 1969. And as a result, he traveled to Poland and to Warsaw in a cold December night, cold December day in 1970. And in front of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and remained for many minutes in silent prayer, asking for forgiveness what Germany did. And that was, for my father, treason. Because this picture of the chancellor kneeling in front of a memorial where my father was an abomination. He yelled and screamed in German. He said, "Schau mal her, Bernd, wieder ein Verräter. Look, Bernd, again a traitor." Now, I was a little bit perplexed because I was raised by my mother. My father was working in Bonn, in the capital of West Germany, as a government employee. And so most of the time I stayed with my mother in Bamberg. And she was a Catholic, a very conservative Catholic. And as an Orthodox Catholic, she sent me to Catholic kindergarten, Catholic elementary school. I was an altar boy. She wanted me to become a priest. That didn't work out, obviously. And for me, kneeling in front of a memorial was, as a Catholic, something very positive, devotion. Why on earth is my father so mad? And in 1972, on this beautiful August day, the chancellor, with a tremendous moral standing in the Western world, opened the Olympics to a great fanfare, and all the teams paraded into the stadium. We had our first TV, black and white though. My parents invited over friends. It was a festive environment. It was wine, beer served, fine food. Everybody applauded when the teams paraded into the stadium. And then suddenly a team paraded into the stadium carrying a flag with a star inside. And in that moment, everybody felt silent. Nobody wanted to say a word. It was the do not ask a question moment. And I asked myself, that's weird. It's another team. Could be Norway, Sweden, or Switzerland. I don't care. But why the adults react so funny? This was the Israeli team. When the Israeli team paraded into the stadium to the great silence, the same team 10 days later was brutally attacked by a group of Palestinian terrorists. They attacked the Olympic Village, climbed the fence. There was nothing to attack. There was very lax security. They climbed the fence and attacked Israelis in the Cornelistrasse in their apartments, brutally butchered 2 of them. And the remainder were taken hostage, and the Olympics came to a halt on request of the West German government, who was very embarrassed about what happened. Jews killed and Jewish blood shed on German soil. That was a horrible event. And the president of the Olympics didn't want to stop the Olympics. He himself, Braunitsch, the president of the Olympic Committee, was a good buddy of Hitler. So he didn't want to stop the Olympics. The German government forced them. And the highest ranking members of the German government negotiated face-to-face with a terrorist leader called Isai. And they begged him to release the hostages, offering members of the German government as hostages instead. Isai refused, demanded to be flown out to an Arab country of their choice. And then Israel should be forced to release hundreds of Arab prisoners from Israeli prisons. An exchange should be made in a public place, such as in Cairo and any other Arab country. And for that, they wanted to be flown out to a military airport outside Munich. Everything was arranged. We watched it on live TV. 2 helicopters took off from the Olympic Village, and they landed behind the closed gates of the military airport in nearby Munich called Fürstenfeldbruck. And then all hell broke loose. Firefight, explosion, night sky was lit by explosion. It lasted for more than an hour. And then an American journalist turned towards the camera and stated, They're all gone. What happened? The German police opened fire, totally outgunned. The Israeli Mossad unit, special unit, specifically Mossad Kidon unit, was on the ground with the head of the Mossad begging the Germans, do not attack them. These are elite soldiers. And the German police did it. As a result, when they were cornered and saw that there's no way out, Issa threw a hand grenade in one helicopter which exploded, and all the Israelis perished in a fireball. And the other helicopter, another terrorist, sprayed with machine gun fire, and everybody perished. And the next day, this picture in the newspaper that shaped and directed my life. That's the reason why I'm speaking to you. I can never forget it. 2 helicopters pictured on the front page of our newspaper. One burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis visible, the other with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats. And a huge headline in German, Jews killed in Germany again. I speak German fluently, but the again part I didn't get. What do you mean again? And I went home and I asked my father the same day and said, what happened? It's terrible. And my father yelled and screamed, schau mal her, was die uns angetan haben. Look what they do to us again. They, the Jews, are responsible to stain the image of Germany again. The victims as perpetrators and the perpetrators as victims. And I was stunned because there was a disproportionate level of response in Germany, in the German society. It was shock. And my father was angry about them, the Jews. I had no idea what Jews meant. The only thing I knew about Jews, that they killed Jesus. That's what I was taught in Sunday school. And I asked in school, we didn't have to ask, our teachers started to talk about the Holocaust as a historic event. Now, you have to take consideration, the term Holocaust didn't exist yet. We were talking about the murder of the Jews. And some of our teachers started to cry. And I was shocked. I heard for the first time murder of 6 million in the name of my country, Germany, not as an act of war, but as an act of deliberate murders and extermination by my country, by Germans. I couldn't deal with that. And I asked myself, my father must know about it. He may help me to understand. And I remember when I asked him for the first time, Father, in the school, we talk about the Holocaust. What did you know? He looked at me and said, Bernd, das ist alles eine Lüge. It's all a lie. That's a Jewish propaganda thing. Don't listen to your teachers. So I was caught within a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my father told me it's a lie. On the other hand, my teachers couldn't tell me a lie because they were so emotional. Something is wrong. And I started to read as much as I could about that time. And the more I read about it, the more I had the lingering feeling my father wouldn't talk about it because something happened with him. He must have known more than that. And I asked him questions. And I remember the first question I asked him was like the first phase of approach. I couldn't talk to my father unless he was an alcoholic, unless he was a little bit schicker, not too drunk and not looking for a drink, but in the schicker zone, so to say. I tried to manipulate him and for money, for what I needed. Typical child of an alcoholic parent behavior. And I asked him, Father, what happened? And he looked at me and said, first of all, whatever allegedly happened with the Jews, the Wehrmacht didn't do anything. It was all the SS. Now, that was a blatant lie. I knew that already from the lady upstairs, that every ranking officer must have known. It was not a closed secret. And years after my father's death, when I started to talk about my story, I found evidence. Number one, a picture of my father sitting next to Heinrich Himmler in 1942 in the East. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS. My father, ranking officer, major in the army, was then lieutenant colonel. In that area, when SS sat together with tank commanders, it was about securing the territory for mass murder. Secondly, I found a letter. I was provided with a letter that my father signed for the deportation of more than 600 prisoners Russian prisoners that he took to a place called Auschwitz for neutralization and treatment. He knew what that meant. And then finally, I still have it at home. In a lecture that I gave in Bamberg, Germany, for the first time in 20 years after I left, a historian of my father's unit who investigated and wrote about my father's tank unit provided me with a suitcase, a metal suitcase, and said, before you start talking, this is something I need to give you. This was brought back by your father's late tank mechanic. And when he died, his children gave it to me, and I should give it to you as the son of the commander. And I opened it, and inside were ripped pieces of Torah scrolls. And I asked him, what does it mean? I said, well, when your father's unit ripped into Jewish villages and killed everybody, they tore out the Torah scrolls out of the burning synagogue, soaked them in water, tore them in pieces, and this moist parchment, this wet parchment, was a wonderful insulation material for German tanks in the cold Polish or Russian winter. That my father was a murderer, I knew it, and he was. Second phase of answers was as follows. Whenever somebody was killed, these were all partisans. Well, the Jews were partisans. Partisans don't follow the Geneva Convention. You could kill them. I asked him a rhetoric question because it was horse manure. Said, you tell me that 1 million plus children murdered, gassed in Auschwitz, their bodies burned, their ashes scattered on the killing fields of Birkenau. You tell me that they were fighting you, the mightiest army in the world? You must be insane that I should believe that. And finally, he told me the final story. He was drunk one night. Said, Bernd, I don't know why your generation is so weak. The world should give us a medal because we got rid of the lichluch, the dreck, den Schmutz. That was, he referred to the Jews. And that was the last straw that broke the camel's back of my father, that I trusted at my father. And I turned away from him, and one of my teachers noticed in my change of behavior, he was a former Jesuit priest, he said, what's happening to you? Said, I found out the following. When he heard the story, said, you need to make amends. As a Catholic, we need to make amends. He was a former Jesuit priest. I said, amends to whom? To the Jews. I said, I don't know Jews. I've never met a Jew. I said, I will arrange it. And at that time, the progressive wing of the Catholic Church and Jesuit priests were involved in peace missions, bringing Israeli Jews and Arabs to Germany and talking about peace and living together. And I joined one of these groups on his behest and invitation. And when young people, 18, 19, meet for the first time, they want to exchange what they liked, what food they liked, what music they liked. I liked the Israeli girls a lot. Well, I have to admit it. It was not only spiritually motivated issues. And this Israeli girl, I liked her. Her name was Pirchia. She asked me, if you like me, will you come to Israel? I was a big Schwitzer. I said, absolutely. There was just one problem. I had no passport, no money. Which when she left, I got a job, a summer job. I got money together, got my passport, and traveled for the first time to Israel, not in the way I would recommend it to do. I hitchhiked to Munich. From Munich, I took a train across the Alps to Ancona in Italy. From the seaport of Ancona, we shipped on the ferry. I slept on deck, not a cruise, through the Mediterranean. We docked in Piraeus after 3 days, reprovisioned. And from there, I sent a telex. That was before Google, Schmoogle, and all that stuff. And I told her that I will arrive in that time and that day in Haifa. And there I arrived. And I remember when I disembarked, standing on Israeli ground, I asked myself, if they find out that I'm my father's son, I will be in big trouble. But on the other hand, she was there embracing me, kissing me, and said, come, my parents want to meet you. And we took a shirut, the community taxi, up to Carmel Mountain, Geneva Shanan, at that time in workers' neighborhood. And it was a small apartment. The parents were waiting outside, waiting. And her father took my rucksack and chit-chatted in Yiddish with me. I had no idea what he was talking about. Her mother took me under the arm and said, come in, you must be tired. They all moved in one room, and they made one room available for me, sat down with me and said, you need to eat, and hummus, falafel, trina. These were not rich people. They shared everything. And when her father noticed that I didn't understand, he looked at me and said, I speak German. Do you want me to speak German to you? I said, how did you learn German? He stretched out his arm, showed me the number tattooed, and said, ich war in den Lagern. I was in the camps, not camps, including Auschwitz. He survived, he told me. He spent 3 years in a displaced person camp in Germany and told me, look, not all Germans were bad. But I want to know, do they teach you? Do they teach you about what happened? And I answered him honestly, I don't know. And I was very uncomfortable for the first time in Israel, for the first time in a Jewish home, for the first time in a home of a Holocaust survivor. And he said, don't worry, I don't hate you, but I want you to learn, and we go to a place where I will show you what happened. A few days later, he took me to Yad Vashem. And with the hand, literally, took me by the hand, walking me throughout the exhibit. And a Holocaust survivor asked it with the son of a perpetrator, walked me through the exhibit. I broke down. I could not get it. How can these people who treated me so as a guest, even though I represented the worst of their enemies, How can they rebuild their personal life, their professional life, create families, and rebuild an old country anew? They must be special. I want to find out who they are. And the way back to Germany, I pondered the question, how can I find out about Jews? And I decided to approach a Jewish community in Germany, which was very, very difficult. There were only about 27,000 Jews, hermetically sealed off in large communities, well, a few thousand in each community in Hamburg, Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich. And in my hometown, there was actually a small community of 30 Holocaust survivors who settled in Germany after the displaced person camps were dissolved and took the jobs that the Americans didn't want to give to any other Germans, so real estate, banking, and they got very wealthy. And one of the community approached, and I remember the first time I knocked at the glass door in the backyard of in the back of a courtyard of a building, nondescript building, and an old man opened the door and looked at me suspiciously and said, "Was willst du?" And I must have rambled something that made him easy enough to open the door. And I walked into this dark hallway. There was just a red light in the corner, and the walls were covered with granite plates, black granite plates, engraved were in them names in a golden color, in gold color. And I asked him, "What is that?" And he looked at me, "Don't know. These are the 1,200 names of Jews from Bamberg who never came back from Theresienstadt." He led me into his office, which was a very, very stuffy place. It was hot, curtains drawn, windows closed, no air condition. He had a white short-sleeved shirt, very pale, and the number tattooed stood out on the forearm. And I stared at the number. I knew what it meant. And he looked at me and said, "Das hier, das ist die number. Ich bin von Auschwitz. My name is Itzhak Rosenberg. I was in Auschwitz as a 14-year-old boy. And I don't know what you want from me." I said, I told him my story. He said, "That's a sad story. You want to know about Jews? Take 2 books, bring them back." I said, "I read all the books. I want to help." I said, "What do you want to help?" I said, "I want to help you with something." I said, "Well, I should teach you. You want to help me? You have to understand there's a Geschäft you have to make. You will be my Shabbos goy, and in return, I will teach you." I had no idea what Shabbos goy meant. It sounded like a good deal. He said, "What do I have to do?" I said, "Come on 6 o'clock on Friday and I show you." I was there at 6 o'clock, bull. And he was not there. He came at 7 something. I said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I should be there at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it's the first lesson. We don't take it so like you Germans. Change." So then he told me what to do, making the food, setting the table, the chairs. And then he told me one important thing. If the alte Kacker, that's what he said, if the alte Kackers are coming and see you, they won't like you. They don't like goys in the synagogue, in the Beit Knesset, in the Stibelech. It was a tiny Beit Knesset in a room, in a living room with a bima, with the Torah scrolls. And when they came in, they looked at me and said, "Was macht der Goy dort?" And Itzhak said, "Don't listen to them, just make yourself invisible." And so Friday by Friday, Saturday by Saturday, week by week, month by month, holiday by holiday, I came there and I absorbed, like through osmosis, the behavior, the mannerism, the language, everything. And the closer I came to this family of choice, the more I distanced myself from my family of origin. And it came to a breakup, many breakups, but one that I'd never forget. When Christmas fell on a Friday night, and I was not there to the Christmas celebration at home. Now, in an Orthodox Catholic house, my father was a Protestant though, that's a big deal. I remember I can play it like a movie. My mother took me to a church with my sister. We came back and we had lentil soup and carp. Then my father was already in the big living room. It was closed by a massive wooden door. Ringing the bell, we opened the door, walked in, the Christmas tree with real candles, and my father was standing right next to the Christmas tree with dark suit and the Knight's Cross around his neck, singing festive Christmas hymns. Now, I was not there when I came back the next day. Everything went south. My mother crying, my father yelling. And I said, "Look, stop this Greek tragedy. I tell you one thing for sure, that you understand it. I will not sit with you at the same table with a bloodstained metal cross around your neck. You're a murderer, and you better admit to that, because I don't want to sit with a murderer at the table celebrating the birth of Christ." My father said one word, "Raus, get out." There was a little problem, kesef. I was the second to last year in medical school. I had a scholarship, but I needed some kesef. And I never got money from the community, never would have taken it anyway. And one member of Itzhak must have told the other members that something happened. And one member of the community who never talked to me approached me and said, his name was Aaron. He said, "Du bist der Goy." I said, "Very perceptive, Aaron, after 5 years. Yeah, your name is Bernd." "Yes." hör mal zu, du Goy, Bernd. Deine Schuhe sind schmutzig, deine Jacke ist schmutzig, your shoes are dirty, your jacket is dirty, which was not true. Kauf dir neue Sachen, buy new stuff, and gave me 100 mark, which was a huge amount of money. So I walked over to Itzhak in his office and said, Itzhak, Aaron told me that gave me 100 mark, and he told me that I should buy some stuff. What should I do? Aaron gave you 100 marks? You took the opportunity asking for 200 at least? I said, no, I didn't, because you're a goy. I said, Thomas, sit down. It's a joke. Sit down. Aaron, we know only thing what we know about him is from the Red Cross that he was in Auschwitz. Nothing is left of his life. We absorbed him in our community knowing that he's a Jew, but he didn't talk to us. He doesn't talk to us. And Aaron started to talk to me in the remaining 6 months of his life, unfortunately. He told me that he was a member of a Sonderkommando in Auschwitz. The Sonderkommando of Auschwitz were Jews. They got a 90-day permission to live. They guided the Jewish families and Jewish individuals, those who were doomed to die, to the gas chamber, gave them a number, said you can take off your clothes, this is the number, remember it because you can pick it up on the other side, closed the metal doors, and then the gas was the Cyclone B was thrown into the gas chamber. And when the screaming and yelling stopped, they opened that gas mask, they opened the doors, took out the Jews, the bodies, took out the gold teeth, burned the bodies, crushed the bones, and threw the remainder in the pits that are still visible in Auschwitz. And for that, they got 90 days, food, wine, everything. And when they thought they're lucky enough to survive, 90 days later, they were gassed, the next group came in. Aaron cried like a child. And 6 months later, when he died, I was asked to participate in the Chevra Kadisha. And I said, Itzhak, I'm not a Jew. I cannot do that. Itzhak said, you're one of us. And when we cleaned him and buried him, and the next day we conducted the funeral, Itzhak gave me the prayer book and said, this is the Kaddish. You say Kaddish. You were his friend. And when I said the Kaddish, I crossed the line. There was no way back. And I told Itzhak, I want to become a Jew. Itzhak looked at me, look, I feared that would happen, but I prepared myself for the day. I know a rabbi in Frankfurt, he will talk you out of it. Don't come back without telling me that it's over, the meshugas that you're telling me here. You don't do it. Well, the rabbi was exactly the same. He said, I will not convert Germans, I will teach you, and that's it, chalas. In Arabic, he said it must speak in Yiddish, in Hebrew. I said, you will not be converted by me, but nobody will convert you, there's no reason. So 2 years he taught me, and every time I met him, I was a pain in the tuchus. I told him I want to convert. He finally gave up. He said it was in the spring of 1986. He said, Bernd, I sent you to a rabbinical court in Trier. They will get together in the fall, actually in winter time. You can try, but I don't guarantee that they will let you pass. But before you even can get there, you need to undergo a little plastic surgery. I don't want to talk about it. In an Orthodox fashion in Switzerland, in a hospital in Basel. And then I had a few months later an immersion in an Orthodox mikveh in Metz in a Hasidic community in France. And then in November 1986, I underwent a halachic conversion in a rabbinical court in Germany, and it was not a drive-through. This was not knowledge testing, Q&A. This was part of it Q&A and part of it character references, but the rabbis and the chief rabbi wanted to know one question to be answered truthfully, honestly, and in all details. Why on earth a son of a Nazi wants to become a Jew? If it's guilt, that doesn't count. And I told him what I felt. And it took maybe half an hour until they returned from a diyun, from a session. I had to stand up. They were sitting on the podium, looking like judges, wearing a black robe. And the chief rabbi asked me to stand up and read in Hebrew and then in German the conversion certificate. It was a very tense moment. And he said, do you have a name? I said, what do you mean by name? I said, your name is Ben Abraham from now on. But your first name, you have a choice. I said, what is your first name? He said, Bernd. Bernd means in Hebrew, you know what that? A bear. You will be Dov, Dov Ben Abraham. Take it, it's free. And he asked me a second question, what do you want to do? And I told him, point blank, I want to go to Israel. Why do you do that? I said, I cannot give money. I'm a young doctor. I cannot participate fully in the care, but I can fight in the army. And that's what I did. I was immediately recognized according to the Chok HaShvut. 1 month later, with the support of the Israeli embassy and the Sochnut, the Jewish agency, I immigrated to Israel. My parents didn't want to see me again. And I began my procedure of Klita. I was in an Ulpan, learned Hebrew, was assigned to a hospital in Tel Aviv to get my license up to Israeli par, became a doctor, was drafted immediately in the army, did basic training, officers course, and it was the first month, it was the first year of the Intifada, first Intifada in 1988. And I was sent to a place in Beit El, right next to Ramallah, where the hotbed of the Intifada was war. And we were all in combat gear. I was a lieutenant. My commanding officer said, look, this doctor, no, you have to change your name. This is not a good name. Whatever he is, your Dr. W, this is your unit. This is the doctor. When you have any problem, don't fool him. He's good, I heard. And I was standing there in the lieutenant uniform, my weapon and gun and handgun as an officer. And I asked myself, if they find out that I'm a son of a Nazi, I'm done. And I didn't want to talk about it. They knew I'm from Germany. My name is Bernd, made Aliyah and served in the army. That's all what I told them. It was a bad thing because I threw my past in a virtual closet, slammed the door shut, turned the key in the lock and ran away. Until my son years later asked me the simple question, Dad, who is my grandfather? And I told him this story. Now my son said, Dad, there's a cool story. Let me tell my friends. Don't tell your friends. Going to a Jewish school with tzitzit and kippah and pray in the morning, you don't tell my story. Well, he did because they had a family history day. And my son, I was told I was not there, raised his right hand and said, my grandfather was a famous Nazi. Not good. I got a call to the principal's office and he was very upset. He said, Dr. Wollschlaeger, you're an esteemed member of our community. Your Tante told us verdrehte Geschichte that your father was a Nazi. What is wrong with Talia? There's a divorce, a get, and it's terrible at home. Maybe he's affected or he smoked drugs. I said, no, it's not my son's fault. And I told him my story. And the rabbi joined us in a point in time in a conversation. And he asked me, not asking me, he told me, you have to tell this story. And he took me to his school class. And I told the story for the first time. And the weight was lifted off my shoulders. And suddenly I asked myself, I had a desire, the urge, what happened in the 20 years that I left Germany? And I decided to go back. Took my son to Germany in December 2003, I think, and 2004, and found my parents' grave because they were long gone in a cemetery of Bamberg, which is an old cemetery where it's very not atypical that Christians and Jewish graves were located in the same cemetery, just divided by a wall. And ironically, if you go to the cemetery in Bamberg, my parents' gravesite is located one row parallel to the wall that separates the Jewish from the Christian cemetery. And when you look towards that wall, you see on the other side the Jewish gravestones almost defiantly casting their shadow to the other side. And here I was standing, I was choked up, I didn't know what to tell my son. I told him, look, this is your grandparents' gravesite, my parents' gravesite, and I don't know what to say except the irony is they rest in the shadow of history because they never stepped out of the shadow. I had to step out of the shadow because I couldn't live with that anymore. Understand what happened and make a commitment that it never happens again. Moving forward to that commitment to teach you and teach others. And that's the reason why I'm talking. Not because I have a sad story. I don't think my story makes me sad. It makes me committed. It's because I want to convey that don't judge people by what individuals, but to what people they belong to. If I would be an Iranian, I'm a human being. If I'm a German, I'm a human being. If I'm a other person, a human being. And don't judge me according to what my people did. I had to make an individual decision, a tough decision. Secondly, I learned from my experience where hatred against Jews comes from, and hatred against anybody comes from. It comes from words of hatred that if left unresponded or non-responded and nobody speaks up, fall on the fertile ground, which is the mind of others. And they sprout into deeds. And if these deeds left unchallenged, they form habits. And if these habits left unchallenged, they're shaping social norms that are being absorbed and shape characters. And these characters then create and codify these norms. That means it is okay to kill Jews because it's normal. And I don't know what's the big deal about it. It starts with words. Now, I wish I could say we realized that and everything is hunky-dory and we can kumbaya and dance the horror because we know what's happening. What happened. Now it's happening again. Right now. I'm not a political talk. I'm not talking about politics, talking about behavior of people, listening to words, sitting in their echo chambers, don't want to listen to anything else anymore, just have tuned one channel on of the internet or TV and just listen what they want to listen to. Do not interact with anybody else. Do not talk each other. Don't want to understand. Just want to be heated up. I'm very concerned, not only about us Jews, but I'm concerned about us human beings. What I did personally, I told my family, we're getting our passports ready, and I activate my Israeli license, and we go when it happens, because it will happen again. It will happen again. I'm not a fearmonger, but what I see and experience in the United States, and blatant hatred, it goes against other people, socialists and communists, all other terrorists. For here in the United States, anybody who thinks different is a terrorist. But soon it will come to those who believe in something, or it will come to the Jews. We will be one of them, because we didn't understand what happened. But there's a big difference to 1933. We have Eretz Israel, Medinat Israel, and I'm a committed Zionist. I love my country. This is my country, not Germany anymore. I'm an Israeli and an American citizen. And when push comes to shove, I fought for my country and I will fight again, even though I'm old. But this is the difference. It's the hopeful outlook. But we have to look out. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And I know I went a little bit over time.
Thank you. That was really, really amazing. What an inspirational speaker, an amazing story, an amazing human being. Tremendous heroism to be able to buck the trend of an entire country and your family, to be able to strive for truth. So many of us cower in fear, and to be able to really push forward is truly legendary, and it's something that everyone admires you for. I think that it's only we have a class at 9 o'clock on Tanya.
Oops.
So let's do one or two questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you have? Okay. And so anyone who has a question, first of all, the first question comes from Joanne Wolf. She asked, do you have any siblings?
Yes, I do have. I had two siblings, two sisters. Unfortunately, one died. And in 2004, her name was Krista. She was 10 years older than I am. And I reconciled with her, and she told me a lot about my family, which I didn't know. I have a younger sister. She's 3 years younger than I am, and I've reconciled with her just a few years ago and know her family, know her children, and I connected to her again. We were not communicating, but we started communicating again.
Wow, amazing. Does anyone else have any questions? A final question, or two more actually? Just type it into the, do your parents, Tamara, do your parents still hold the anti-Semitic Nazi worldviews?
My parents are dead.
My parents are passed on, so yeah.
They're passed on, but the question is a valid question. As long as they were alive, my mother had the following view. She told me, look, I tried to convince your father not to be a party member, which he didn't do, but he sucked up the ideology with the mother's milk. And I knew that with Hitler would have a bad ending. But you have to understand, everybody suffered. And it's not only the Jews they take the mantle and cloak themselves in a mantle of suffering. My response was, you kidding me? I know that you suffered, but that suffering is different than the deliberate murder of 6 million. How could that happen? So she was very touched by it, very hurt, because she wanted to convey to me that's the same. It was not the same.
A final question, anybody? More about your time in Israel, maybe. Do you want?
Well, my time in Israel, the first year I told you, spent in the so-called Immigration Absorption Center, Misrat HaKlita, under the umbrella, but I quickly arose and shed myself from all the support because I was a physician, so I could work and live by myself. I was immediately drafted in the military for a 2-year stint as a doctor because I got a discount because I was 28 years old. If I would have known that I have to train and exercise with 19-year-olds, that was a hammer. But anyway, did my Miluim service in Israel, was stationed in Lebanon, and most of the time I was in the military and in and out. Did worked in the cardiology department of Ichilov. It's now called the Elias Sorovsky Medical Center. So mostly a physician as a soldier.
Thank you very much. The question was asked, a final question. Did you marry the girl you originally went to Israel for? I guess the hopeless romantic.
No. I married another Israeli girl.
Okay, we're going to end it now. Just before we do, just to advertise that on Monday we have Dr. Lawrence Schiffman. We're getting a lot of doctors. This might be a Jewish theme. Who's going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's the leading expert on Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's an amazing discoveries that have recently happened. So he's going to talk about them. I'm putting the flyer now in the chat so everybody can see it. And just message me if you're coming so we can have some idea of numbers. I also just want to say on a personal level, besides the inspiration of your actual story, the Shul's Zoom account had 100 people as a maximum. And then someone passed on and we had a shiva. So they asked if I could expand it. So I did so. And we've had many other talks, but nobody has broken the number of the shiva. Now we have something positive that has smashed that number. So I really appreciate it. You've been a phenomenal speaker. And thank you everybody for showing up. Tomorrow night shul is 6 p.m. We have Tanya now at 9 p.m. And as I said, I put the Monday evening talk on the chat. Doctor, you can get back to your real job now, but this is also curing hearts and healing people in a way that goes far beyond you might even imagine. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Litrot. Shalom,
all the
shalom.
Best, guys. I'm going to close the video and then re-sign on for anyone who's joining the Tanya class. All the best, everybody. Litrot.